All right, go for it, Maya.
Great. Just some quick announcements. Here are the links to the slide deck. I'm putting that in the chat. And for those who would like a transcript, there's that as well. Also, I've numbered the slides with a deck of cards in case you have specific questions and would like to reference a particular slide. All right. So this is my first time presenting at a virtual conference, and it is also my first time presenting at OpenEd. So I want to take a moment to situate myself on these two fronts. Although virtual can seem placeless, I want to acknowledge my place as a settler and visitor in unceded Indigenous territories of the Kanien'kehá:ka, where the island called Montreal is located. Here, I am a graduate student at Concordia University and writer in residence at the Rebus Foundation. My background spanned the arts and sciences, and I have research experience and degrees conferred from countries including the US, Japan, Italy, and Denmark. The backstory to this presentation is this. I am a graduate student who is already proactive about integrating culturally relevant examples and universal design principles into my teaching and publishing. But it wasn't until last year that OER came onto my radar. For instance, my university recently hired and vacated an OER librarian position. Many of my colleagues and supervisors think that open access is synonymous with ebook. And now, in my 5th year as a graduate student, I'm looking back on my time, having taught 2 undergraduate courses as an instructor, TA'd for an introductory course in my department, and published numerous handouts, slide decks, and syllabi without so much as a nod to the 5 Rs. I feel like a latecomer to OER, and I wish I'd been able to incorporate OER practices earlier in my graduate career. Over this past summer, I started to attend the community meetings for this conference, and I began to wonder, if open education is trying to shift from niche to default, could that change also happen from the inside? Could I mobilize myself as a graduate student to help with this transition? And why is it that graduate students are missing from and missing out on discussions in OER? Likely, the same forces that are keeping out graduate students, intentionally or not, are the exact same forces that open education is trying to push back against, such as assumed hierarchies that privilege certain populations over others, presumed expendability of educational labor whose load often falls on but a few, or sustained expectations with the status quo, as in it's broken, but don't fix it if, ... Graduate students are but a small percentage of the university ecosystem. As such, we are often invisible and invisibilized. What I mean by that is we are often overlooked as communities in need of resources, and we are often overly relied upon to ensure proper functioning of a broken university system. We are asked to perpetuate its expansion logic, as in more productivity, less questioning, and we are asked to reinforce its exclusivity, as in conflating professionalization with prestige. But as CJ Ivory mentioned in yesterday's presentation, graduate students are not immune to the systemic and structural barriers of the educational sector. So today I want to discuss 3 questions with you. The first 2 are my own observations. Question 1, how are graduate students currently positioned to get involved with or in OpenEd? Question 2, what initiatives can better integrate OpenEd and graduate student communities? And my last question is meant to be a brainstorming session or an open conversation of sorts. What other opportunities and resources might result from graduate student involvement with OpenEd? In other words, what other possibilities do you see coming from involving graduate students with OpenEd? Graduate students take on many different roles over the course of their 1 to 5+ years. These can include being a learner, instructor, teaching assistant, research assistant, and public scholar. And in each of these roles, grad students interact with different audiences, including university faculty, undergraduate students, librarians, researchers, and the broader public. And what do we do with these constituents? We generate content for the classroom and often create content for folks beyond the classroom too, through the likes of grant reports, policy briefs, public commentary, and peer-to-peer resources. From my outsider perspective, I see 3 points of intervention that frame grad students as potential agents of change. One is as a mediator, that is moving between instructor and learner or between researcher and public. 2, as an ambassador in education for training peers and later generations. Or 3, as an ambassador in adjacent fields, such as working with funding agencies towards more equitable, accessible, and inclusive futures. In thinking about these roles, I can't help but think that graduate students seem perfectly positioned to shift open ed from niche to default. Graduate students are at once the trainees and the trainers. That is, we receive instruction and provide it to multiple audiences. In other words, graduate students are already the mediators in the educational world who could be trained with native fluency in OER and become ambassadors for future projects and open initiatives. I propose 2 initiatives that could potentially integrate open ed and graduate student communities. My first idea is a certificate in open approaches. In consultation with organizations like Spark and community feedback, a set of core competencies would be agreed upon. Then, building on the works of other open ed projects, a series of remixed modules would build out the curriculum. Importantly, the eligibility criteria would not be based on having librarianships or faculty positions. In a way, it would combine the skills and know-how of open pedagogy, open publishing, and the commons. My second idea would be a formal shadowing system. Think of medical residencies and how pre-med students are exposed to a variety of specializations on the ground in real time. These kinds of shadow opportunities would expose grad students to future possibilities with open ed, such as ways to promote OER sustainability, policy, and stewardship. Importantly, the pairings would be made across institutions and across disciplines based on interest, availability, and formal agreements to respect everyone's time and labor. An important commonality between these 2 ideas is that these initiatives would directly engage with graduate students. That is, they would not need a faculty supervisor or teaching contract to gain entry into the OER world. Yes, trans-institution partnerships is a great idea. Given that supervision is unpaid labor and teaching opportunities are competitive, removing these barriers would enable graduate students to engage with OER freely. To recap, I've observed 3 possibilities for the graduate student to become involved as a mediator, as a future open ed ambassador in the educational sector, and as a future ambassador in adjacent fields. I've also proposed 2 initiatives that could engage grad students into shifting open ed from niche to default, a certificate program and a shadow system or residency program. The possibilities of involving graduate students seem to be mutually beneficial. Stakeholders in open ed can broaden their impact by engaging with graduate students early in their professionalization, while graduate students can gain exposure and proficiency in open approaches as they go on to different professions. As a graduate student and a newcomer to open education, this possibility makes me feel both incredibly hopeful and like it's too good to be true. At this point, I want to shift gears and seek your thoughts and reactions. And I've come to my third question now. What other opportunities and resources might result from graduate students' involvement with open ed? In other words, how would you want to involve graduate students in your open ed projects? And because I'm eager for community feedback, if you're here with me on this session, I invite you to use the either the chat box, or I would actually invite you to unmute yourselves and engage in this conversation with me about what other opportunities or resources could happen as a result of graduate students becoming involved in the open ed world. I see somebody saying, oh, Kaylin, hello. I would love to work more closely with grad students' governments to pass institution policies. Yes, I think that legal and policy work is a great way also to, I think, imbue the current scholarly narrative around becoming a scholar activist. I think, Kaylin, that would be an incredibly great way to integrate two closely tied agendas. I have a question here from Alex. These are brilliant ideas, Maya. Thank you. What do you observe or anticipate to be some of the obstacles to materialize these ideas? Some of the obstacles that I can identify already, one is unpaid time and labor, that it would go into developing these professionalization modules, or to even to solicit and request the support from potential mentors or for feedback. I can also foresee that it seems to me at the moment, a lot of the OER initiatives are so localized, and they ought to be. I think it's good that they are, right? Colorado has a really great, strong community, and Idaho. There are so many of these little pockets that then a consortium has to happen in order for those resources to kind of be passed around. I don't see, unless I just haven't looked far enough, I don't see yet this sort of like student association or graduate student caucus type of gathering and initiatives. I'm a member of a few academic associations, and it's very common to have a graduate student caucus for the kind of faculty versions. I know Open Education Conference is not necessarily limited to academics or even librarians. So I'd be curious to see how these different groups might come together. Jeff, have you unionized to have more leverage? Yes, I think unionizing to have more leverage at an institution would be great. At my particular institution, the graduate students are in the same union as part-time faculty, but graduate students do not necessarily have the same protections as part-time faculty. For instance, part-time faculty may have a 3-year term to adjunct and lecture, whereas graduate students, we may be at an institution for 5, 6, even perhaps more years. And if our activity in the union is somehow going against the status quo at the university level, then that may have some ramifications. For instance, on a committee, if I have a dissertation committee or a hiring committee who is looking at my work, I would have perhaps not as much protections as, say, a part-time faculty member. But I think there is something to be said about unionizing and gathering. I appreciate that comment, Jeff. Jody, I was late joining, so perhaps this has already been mentioned, but grad students will be great at creation of and collaboration of open pedagogy projects, even if they are not serving as instructors of record. For sure, Jody, I absolutely agree with you. And I wish that this could be incorporated and normalized as part of the kind of graduate student experience. I feel like, at least at my institution, the idea of we just got to UDL, and that was the like, yay, let's get there. That's important. And so while accessibility is certainly good to think on, it may not necessarily incorporate all aspects of open pedagogy or open approaches. So yes, I'm with you. Stephen, I love this idea because it gets at how OER should be part of all disciplines. Yes, not just library work. I agree. Perhaps students could work with people in their disciplines as well as librarians or other OER experts as they approach and available resources vary so much depending on subject area. Yes, although I would also point out that it seems to me that the values of open need not be so rooted in individual subject areas. For instance, licensing, right? Licensing of materials to me is something that crosses all disciplines. For sure, how a lab manual gets licensed may be different than how a student, documentary might be licensed. But I think that there might be a way to kind of look at the commonalities and really push the values of open education and open approaches. Thank you for your comment. Veronica, how do we encourage graduate students to be more involved with open work without harming their job prospects? Here, here. Unfortunately, the field doesn't value open in the same way. A presentation yesterday encouraged folks not to heavily contribute until after tenure. Yes, this is definitely something that I struggle with as a fifth year and, trying to plan my exit strategy. I am still dissertating, and yes, I'm trying to figure out what are my values and how do I want to present myself as I move forward onto my next career. And I definitely feel like that there is a risk involved. I also happen to think that I believe in the open principles enough to where if that is somehow seen as a detractor on the market, that's probably somebody I don't want to work with anyways. And I'm willing to kind of stomach that. I know that that's not an easy decision to make, and I'm certainly coming from a place of privilege to be able to even say that. But I think that it's not to dismiss, Veronica, the reality that you're painting, because I think it's absolutely there, but I'm not sure that to then lay down and say, well, I'm just going to wait until tenure to enact and implement these open principles. I'm not sure that that's really the way to enact change. And I'm really hoping that there can be more gray room than just the kind of black and white. There are so many comments now. Goodness, I would just also want to say, if I don't get to your comment or question, I ask people to still contribute into the chat box, because I will download this for me. And if not, please, I will ask you to, that we keep this conversation going, and that here are some ways that you can reach me. I've also created, perhaps preemptively, a Discord server specifically on this. And so if you are looking to collaborate and to have more kind of detailed discussions around what this could look like, I invite you there. Where was I? Oh, Veronica, I didn't see part 2 of your question comment. What can folks already established in the field do to legitimize and lift up OER so it values graduate students to be involved? Yes, please, goodness, that would be the dream. And if you already know of a few champions out there who are established in the field, please engage them in this conversation. Let us build momentum, right? High tide lifts all boats. Colby, in my discipline and likely other science disciplines, graduate students' primary focus beyond classes is conducting research. Yes, their advisors are usually pretty protective of the graduate students' time and efforts. To me, it seems like the best way to engage graduate students in science disciplines is to incorporate OER development into course-related projects. Yes, I agree. I think that incorporating OER development earlier on, and whether that is in course-related projects or just built into syllabi, built into that professionalizing, built into every single conference that you ever go to, every single paper that you ever publish. I see this as a pipeline issue. If we engaged earlier on, I cannot see a negative outcome. I really don't, besides the earlier obstacles I mentioned, which is unpaid time and labor. So, I'm with you, Colby. Sarah, oh, such a wonderful smile. I so enjoyed your, I don't remember where it was that I saw you yesterday presenting, but you had such a wonderful laugh and smile. Yes, and also as graduate students get involved in open work, they are more likely to continue to be involved in the field in the future, in their future work. Yes, again, pipeline, start them early. Why not? Tiffany, involving grad students earlier on also creates the possibility to have undergraduate grad mentorships, which may be less intimidating for some undergraduates than working directly with faculty members. Yes, and this speaks to that first role that I mentioned of being that mediator, right? And I would even also say that not only undergraduate grad mentorships, but even graduate faculty mentorships, right? I have a supervisor, she is fantastic, but she has no interest in OER necessarily. And so how then do I engage directly with faculty members in OER? If it was not for this particular community, I'm not sure if I would have been able to make that jump, right? So I think that there's plenty of opportunities to kind of buffer those who want to and those who aren't able to, but I'll maybe leave it at that. Thank you, Tiffany. Mariana, disciplinary differences between grad students' interest in open education, question mark. I'm not sure what you're getting at. Mariana, if you wouldn't mind maybe writing me directly to perhaps clarify. Apurva, so nice to see you. Grad students would need to be appropriately recognized and rewarded for this type of work. Amen. With this type of engagement, I can see radical changes taking place in tenure and promotion systems. Yes, this speaks to an earlier comment. As we begin to value different kinds of work related to open ed from early on, grad students can then have a different set of career expectations and requirements to follow and meet. Woof. Yes, 1000%, plus 1,000. Ken Lyons, one of the main impediments faculty have in adopting OER materials in their courses is the time involved in converting from existing, often long-used commercial textbooks and other materials. Could graduate students with subject expertise play a role in helping select appropriate OER materials and working with faculty incorporate them into the syllabus? Grant programs could, of course, help with such efforts. For sure, I think that because there's so much momentum already in the kind of undergraduate introductory courses, 500 students at a time, long used commercial textbooks, and converting that. Yes, I think that perhaps an RA-ship could be organized in order to make that conversion. But I also think that there might be even opportunities for new materials to be generated, right? That perhaps the long used commercial textbooks are out of date, or perhaps need to be decolonized, or perhaps need to be culturally relevant, made accessible. All of these things that that participants at this conference are talking about, I think could maybe even wedge into that idea of, well, we've used this introductory textbook for so long, it's so perfect. I wonder if there was also a way to generate new materials and update them. If you're gonna put in the time, you might as well make the thing good and relevant and not oppressive. Ideal. I have only about 2 minutes left, so I'm hoping that I can get to at least a few more. And again, I encourage you to reach out, and I really invite you to keep this conversation going through email and Twitter and Discord server. I will be at the conference throughout the rest of the week. Let's see, Melanie, graduate students can conduct, collaborate, or participate in research on open pedagogy or OER. Yes. I don't know about conduct unless I was in an ed tech or education field. I'm not sure how I would be able to justify doing research, but perhaps at different institutions there might be different. Connie, developing OER with students is a means to assign Creative Commons licenses, as most HEI hold IP rights. Higher education institutions. I'm still learning all the acronyms, y'all. Please bear with me. As most higher education institutions hold intellectual property rights as the employer. Yes, contract for hire. So the OER is a student assignment that open licenses are suggested. For sure. One of the many laments that I have, and maybe I'll use this as my last comment. one of the many laments that I have with my peers and my friends, and certainly friends and allies in the open education world, is I've already produced a whole lot of stuff, right? I've produced syllabi, publications, course handouts, slide decks. I've talked at things, at conferences. I've produced videos. I've made all of this without knowing my rights, without knowing Creative Commons licensing. Had I known earlier, goodness, I would have been a CC fiend. I would just like gone insane and just mad, pushed out all sorts of stuff. But the cake is already baked, right? I can't make it gluten-free now. It would be quite impossible, right? Or it's not impossible. I would just have to do so many workarounds, right? So this is part of the justification for my talk today of like, I wish I knew this earlier. Anyways, I think that's my time is up. Thank you so much for your time and for your comments. And again, if I was not able to get to your comment or question in the chat, I will certainly download them and read them at a later time. Again, I invite you to contact me, and I look forward to the rest of my time with you guys at this conference. Thank you so much.
All right,
You're
I'm
also
going to go
welcome to
ahead and
stay.
stop the recording. Then you guys are welcome to keep chatting.